At my sister's engagement party, my own mother stood up and announced to 50 guests that my cooking was so terrible, she'd rather eat cardboard. Everyone laughed as I stood there humiliated, holding the dessert I'd spent days perfecting. But what they didn't know was that I had just signed the biggest catering contract in the city's history, and my revenge would be served at the very next family gathering. My name is Hannah, and I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of the Morrison family. While my sister Jessica pursued law and my brother Marcus went into finance, I chose to follow my passion for cooking. My parents never understood why I'd want to waste my life in a kitchen when I had graduated summa cum laude from business school. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now owned 3 successful restaurants in downtown Chicago, lived in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, and drove a Tesla Model S. But to my family, I was still just Hannah who played with food instead of getting a real job. It was a crisp October evening when Jessica announced her engagement to Bradley, a corporate lawyer from one of the city's most prestigious firms. The celebration was being held at our family's estate in Winnetka, the same house where I'd grown up feeling invisible. I had spent 3 days preparing something special for the occasion, a 7-layer chocolate masterpiece with gold leaf decoration and raspberry coulis that had taken me years to perfect. As I walked through the front door carrying my creation, I could hear the chatter of 50 guests mingling in the grand living room. Crystal glasses clinked, designer heels clicked against marble floors, and the sound of practiced laughter filled the air. These were Chicago's elite, judges, CEOs, politicians, and socialites who moved in the same circles as my parents. "Oh, Hannah's here with another one of her little cooking experiments," my mother, Patricia, announced loudly as I entered the room. Her voice carried that particular tone she reserved for public humiliation, sweet on the surface, but razor-sharp underneath. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, every inch the society matron she'd always been. I forced a smile and set the cake on the designated table. "I made Jessica's favorite," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The chocolate raspberry cake she used to request for every birthday." "How thoughtful," Patricia replied, her eyes scanning the dessert with obvious disdain. "Though I do hope the catering service we hired made enough proper desserts. You know how your cooking can be unpredictable." Several guests had gathered around now, their conversations pausing as they sensed drama brewing. My father, Robert, stood nearby in his tailored navy suit, saying nothing but nodding along with his wife's commentary. Jessica, radiant in a flowing emerald dress, seemed oblivious to the tension as she accepted congratulations from well-wishers. "Actually," Patricia continued, her voice growing louder and more theatrical, "I have the most amusing story about Hannah's cooking adventures." She gestured toward me as if I were a prop in her performance. "Last Christmas, she insisted on making the turkey. Well, it was so dry, we actually used it as a doorstop afterward." The crowd erupted in polite laughter. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as all eyes turned to me, waiting for my reaction. This was classic Patricia Morrison, publicly humiliate Hannah while maintaining the facade of family bonding. "Mother, that's not exactly," I began, but she wasn't finished. "And don't get me started on her famous lasagna," Patricia continued, air quotes emphasizing her mockery. "I swear, I'd rather eat cardboard. At least cardboard doesn't pretend to be Italian cuisine." The laughter grew louder now. I caught sight of Jessica's future mother-in-law, Eleanor Whitman, whispering something to her husband behind her champagne flute. Marcus smirked from across the room where he stood with his wife, clearly enjoying the show. "Hannah has always been creative with food." Robert finally spoke up, his tone suggesting creativity was a character defect. "We keep encouraging her to consider a more stable career path. Cooking is such an unpredictable field, especially when you're not very good at it," Patricia added with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I stood there frozen, my hands trembling slightly as I watched 50 of Chicago's most influential people treat my passion like a joke. These were the same people who had no idea that my restaurants had been featured in Food and Wine magazine, that I'd trained under James Beard Award winners, or that I'd just signed a contract to cater the city's most exclusive charity gala. The final blow came when Eleanor Whitman approached the cake table. She examined my creation with the air of someone inspecting a questionable piece of art. "It's quite ambitious," she said diplomatically before turning to Patricia. "Perhaps we should stick to the professional caterer's desserts for the actual serving?" That's when something inside me snapped. Not visibly, I maintained my composure, but internally, a switch flipped. I had spent years trying to earn my family's respect, bringing them meals from my restaurants, sharing my successes, hoping they'd eventually see me as more than their disappointing daughter. But standing there, watching them mock my work in front of Chicago's elite, I realized they would never change. "You know what?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're absolutely right. My cooking isn't for everyone." I picked up my cake and walked toward the kitchen, ignoring the whispers that followed in my wake. In the privacy of the butler's pantry, I pulled out my phone and made a call that would change everything. "Marcus Chen," I said when he answered. Marcus was the event coordinator for Whitman and Associates, one of Chicago's most exclusive catering companies. We'd been friends since culinary school, though our paths had diverged dramatically. "It's Hannah. I need you to do me a favor." Over the next hour, I learned something that made my blood run cold. The Whitman family's annual charity gala, the social event of the year, was scheduled for the following month. The original caterer had just canceled due to a family emergency, leaving Eleanor Whitman scrambling to find a replacement. The event would host 300 of the city's most powerful people, including my entire family. But here's what made it perfect. Eleanor had no idea that Morrison Culinary Group, the catering company she was desperately trying to hire, was mine. 3 years ago, I had established Morrison Culinary Group as the parent company for my restaurants. I kept a low profile, preferring to let my executive chef take the public credit while I focused on the business side. It was a decision that had protected me from the food industry's notorious politics, but it also meant that very few people knew I was the owner. Eleanor Whitman was about to hire the daughter she'd just insulted to cater the most important event of her social calendar. The next morning, I sat in my office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, staring out at the city skyline while I planned my revenge. My assistant, Maria, had already confirmed the meeting with Eleanor for that afternoon. The contract was worth $200,000, not a small sum even for someone in my position. She specifically requested our most exclusive package, Maria reported, reading from her notes. Apparently, she heard about our work at the governor's mansion last spring. I smiled, remembering that event. It had been a political fundraiser where I'd served deconstructed versions of classic American dishes to rave reviews. The story had made the society pages, though my name had been buried in the fine print. At 2 p.m., Eleanor Whitman arrived at my office building. I watched from my window as her driver helped her from a black Mercedes. She was impeccably dressed in a burgundy wool coat and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. I met her in the conference room, having changed into my most professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Eleanor didn't recognize me from the party. To her, I had been just another invisible family member in the background. "MS. Morrison," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet on such short notice. This event is absolutely crucial for our family's foundation." "Of course, Mrs. Whitman. I understand the importance of the occasion." I gestured for her to sit at the polished conference table where I had laid out sample menus and photos from previous events. For the next hour, Eleanor described her vision for the gala. She wanted sophistication, elegance, and flavors that would impress Chicago's most discerning palates. She specifically mentioned that several food critics would be in attendance, along with the mayor, 2 senators, and at least a dozen CEOs. "I need perfection," she emphasized, leaning forward intently. "There can be absolutely no mistakes. This event will determine whether we raise enough funds for the children's hospital wing we're trying to build." "I completely understand," I assured her. "Perfection is our standard." As we discussed details, I learned more about Eleanor's expectations. She wanted past hors d'oeuvres during the cocktail hour, a 7-course tasting menu for dinner, and an elaborate dessert presentation that would serve as the evening's finale. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago society. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "My son is marrying into the Morrison family, no relation to your company, of course. They're lovely people, but they have some rather provincial ideas about food. I'm hoping this event will show them what real culinary excellence looks like." I nearly choked on my water. Eleanor was asking me to use my own skills to show my family what real culinary excellence looked like. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. "I'm sure they'll be impressed," I managed to say. We finalized the contract that afternoon. Eleanor signed without even negotiating the price, desperate to secure what she believed was the city's premier catering service. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Ms. Morrison, I have complete faith in your abilities. This event will make or break several important relationships for my family. Please don't let me down." "Mrs. Whitman," I replied, "I promise you an evening no one will ever forget." The next 4 weeks were a blur of preparation. I assembled my best team, chefs I had personally trained, servers who understood the nuances of high society events, and coordinators who could manage every detail flawlessly. We planned a menu that would redefine what Chicago's elite thought they knew about fine dining. The appetizers alone were works of art: truffle-infused mac and cheese spheres that burst with flavor, deconstructed beef Wellington bites that melted on the tongue, and caviar service with house-made blinis that elevated the traditional presentation to new heights. For the main courses, we designed a progression that told a story, from delicate amuse-bouches to rich, complex entrees that showcased techniques I had learned in kitchens from New York to Paris. But the dessert course would be my masterpiece. I planned a chocolate sculpture garden that would be assembled live during the event, accompanied by individually crafted petit fours that matched each guest's dinner selection. It would be theatrical, delicious, and absolutely unforgettable. 3 days before the event, Eleanor called my office in a panic. "Ms. Morrison, I just heard that James Chin from the Tribune's food section will be attending. He's notoriously difficult to please. Are you sure we're ready for this level of scrutiny?" James Chun was indeed one of the city's most respected food critics and, coincidentally, the brother of my friend Marcus, who had helped orchestrate this entire situation. I happened to know that James had already reviewed 2 of my restaurants favorably, though he had never connected them to Morrison Culinary Group. "Mrs. Whitman, I appreciate your concern, but I'm confident Mr. Chin will be impressed. We've actually worked with him before." The morning of the gala, I arrived at the Whitman estate at 6 a.m. with a team of 25 staff members and enough equipment to serve a small army. The estate was a sprawling mansion in Lake Forest, with manicured gardens, a circular driveway, and enough space to host the president if necessary. As we set up, I could see Eleanor watching from the windows, clearly nervous about the evening ahead. By noon, the transformation was remarkable. We had turned the estate's ballroom into a culinary theater, complete with open cooking stations where guests could watch their meals being prepared. At 4 p.m., I retreated to the master suite that Eleanor had offered for final preparations. I changed into a black cocktail dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and elegant. Tonight, I wouldn't be hiding in the kitchen. I would be front and center, watching my family's reaction as they realized who had created their real culinary excellence. The guests began arriving at 6 p.m. I positioned myself in the grand foyer, greeting VIPs and ensuring everything flowed smoothly. Eleanor introduced me to several key attendees as the brilliant chef who saved our gala, still unaware of our family connection. At 6:30, I saw them arrive. My parents' Mercedes pulled up to the valet station, followed by Jessica and Bradley in his BMW, and finally Marcus with his wife in their Audi. They were dressed in their finest, Patricia in a flowing navy gown that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, Robert in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and Jessica glowing in a gold dress that complemented her engagement ring beautifully. I watched from behind a marble pillar as they entered the foyer, greeting Eleanor with their kisses and practiced small talk. They moved through the cocktail reception with the ease of people born into this world, sampling my hors d'oeuvres and praising the presentation without any idea who had created them. "These truffle bites are incredible," I heard Jessica tell Eleanor. "Where did you find this caterer?" "Morrison Culinary Group," Eleanor replied proudly. "They're simply the best in the city. Wait until you taste the main course." I felt a surge of satisfaction watching my sister unknowingly praise my work. For years, she had dismissed my career as a hobby, but now she was raving about my food to Chicago's social elite. The cocktail hour continued flawlessly. My servers moved through the crowd like choreographed dancers, ensuring glasses stayed full and appetizers appeared before guests could even realize they wanted them. I caught snippets of conversation as people praised the flavors, the presentation, and the seamless service. At 8 p.m., we announced dinner. The guests moved into the ballroom, where we had created a dining experience that was part restaurant, part theater. Each table had a perfect view of our open kitchen stations, where my chefs prepared certain courses live. The lighting was dramatic but warm, and soft jazz played in the background. I took my position at the pass, orchestrating the service like a conductor leading an orchestra. From here, I could see my family's table clearly. They had been seated with the Whitmans and several other prominent families, positioned to have the best view of the culinary show we were about to present. The first course was our amuse-bouche, a single spoonful that combined caviar, creme fraiche, and micro-herbs in a way that exploded with flavor. I watched my father's eyebrows raise in surprise as he tasted it, followed by a nod of approval to the man beside him. "This is exceptional," Patricia announced to her table, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear. "Eleanor, you've outdone yourself with this selection." Course after course, the reactions grew more enthusiastic. The soup course featured a tableside presentation where servers poured hot lobster bisque over delicate seafood dumplings. The fish course showcased locally sourced lake trout with a technique I had perfected during a stage in Copenhagen. Each dish built upon the last, creating a symphony of flavors that had the entire room buzzing with appreciation. By the time we reached the meat course, a perfectly prepared Wagyu beef with truffle sauce, even the notoriously difficult James Chun was taking notes. I could see him photographing each plate, a sure sign that he was planning a review. But it was during the dessert presentation that everything came together perfectly. We had saved the chocolate sculpture garden for last, assembling it live in the center of the ballroom while servers distributed individualized petit fours to each guest. The sculpture itself was a miniature recreation of Chicago's skyline, complete with edible buildings and sugar glass windows that caught the light like jewels. The room erupted in applause as we completed the final touches. Guests stood from their seats, phones appearing to capture the moment for social media. Eleanor looked like she might cry with relief and joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor announced, tapping her champagne flute for attention. "I think we can all agree that tonight's culinary experience has been absolutely extraordinary. Please join me in thanking the brilliant team from Morrison Culinary Group for creating magic before our eyes." The applause was thunderous. My family clapped enthusiastically, still unaware that they were celebrating my work. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the perfect setup for my revelation. I stepped out from behind the kitchen station, removed my chef's apron, and walked toward the center of the ballroom. The applause continued as guests assumed I was just another member of the service team. "Thank you all for your kind words," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "It's been an honor to create this evening for you." I could see confusion beginning to dawn on some faces. Why was a server giving a speech? Mrs. Whitman asked me to create an evening that would show her future family what real culinary excellence looked like. I continued, turning slightly toward my parents' table. "I hope I've succeeded in that goal." Eleanor nodded enthusiastically, still not understanding where this was heading. "You see, cooking has always been my passion," I said, my eyes finding my mother's face in the crowd. Even when people told me it wasn't a real career. Even when they said I'd be better off doing something more stable. Even when my own family mocked my skills in front of rooms full of people. Patricia's face had gone pale. She was starting to understand. "Some of you may know me as Hannah Morrison," I continued, daughter of Robert and Patricia Morrison, sister to Jessica and Marcus. "But what you probably don't know is that I'm also the owner and executive chef of Morrison Culinary Group." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see shock rippling through the crowd as people processed this information. My family looked like they had been struck by lightning. Every bite you enjoyed tonight, every flavor that impressed you, every technique that amazed you, that was my work. The same work that was recently described as worse than cardboard by someone sitting at table 12. I gestured toward my mother, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Mrs. Whitman, you hired me because you wanted to show the Morrison family what real culinary excellence looked like." Mission accomplished. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly James' chin began to clap. Other guests joined in, and soon the entire ballroom was erupting in applause again. But this time, it felt different. This time, it was acknowledgement not just of the meal, but of the dramatic revelation they had just witnessed. Eleanor Whitman looked mortified as she realized she had unknowingly hired her future daughter-in-law's sister to embarrass that same family. But she was trapped by social convention. She couldn't exactly complain about the best meal her guests had ever experienced. As the applause died down, I walked over to my family's table. They sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. "Hannah," Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. "We had no idea." "That's exactly the problem," I replied calmly. "You had no idea because you never bothered to find out. You were so busy being embarrassed by my career that you never asked about my success." Jessica looked up at me with something approaching awe. "The Morrison Culinary Group, that's really yours?" 3 restaurants, 40 employees, and contracts with some of the city's most exclusive venues, I confirmed. Including tonight's event. Marcus, ever the businessman, was the first to recover. "Hannah, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us about the scope of your business?" "When?" I asked. Between the jokes about my food experiments and the suggestions that I needed a real job, you made it clear that my cooking wasn't worth your time. Robert cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable in his perfectly pressed tuxedo. "We may have misjudged the situation. You humiliated me at Jessica's engagement party," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You made jokes about my passion in front of 50 people. You treated my work like a hobby that embarrassed you. So I decided to show you exactly what my hobby could accomplish." The conversation was interrupted by Eleanor Whitman approaching our table, her face flushed with champagne and excitement. "Hannah, darling," she gushed, apparently choosing to embrace the drama rather than be mortified by it. "This has been the most talked about event of the season. James Chin just told me he's planning a feature article. You've made our gala legendary." She turned to my parents with a bright smile. "You must be so proud of your daughter. I had no idea we had such talent in the family. Hannah has just elevated our entire social circle's understanding of fine dining." Patricia managed a weak smile. "Yes, we're very proud." I've already had 3 people ask for Morrison Culinary Group's contact information, Eleanor continued enthusiastically. I think you're about to be very busy, my dear. As Eleanor fluttered away to accept more congratulations, my family sat in the aftermath of their public comeuppance. The other guests at their table, prominent Chicago socialites, were looking at them with a mixture of amusement and pity. Everyone had witnessed the family that had been embarrassed by their own daughter's success. Hannah, Jessica said softly, I owe you an apology. We all do. This is incredible. It's not just incredible, I replied. It's what I've been trying to show you for years. But you were so invested in being embarrassed by my career that you couldn't see what I was actually accomplishing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and business cards. Food critics approached me for interviews. Society matrons booked tentative dates for their own events. By the time the last guest departed at 1 a.m., I had enough new contracts to keep my team busy for the next 6 months. My family lingered as the staff cleaned up around us. They seemed reluctant to leave, perhaps realizing that this conversation would continue without the buffer of public setting. Hannah, Patricia finally said, I think we need to talk. Really talk. Yes, I agreed. I think we do. 3 weeks later, James Chen's review appeared on the front page of the Tribune's food section. The headline read, Morrison Culinary Group delivers Michelin star experience in Chicago's society debut. He described the evening as a masterclass in culinary artistry and specifically praised the theatrical revelation that elevated dining into performance art. The review mentioned my family's surprise at discovering my identity, turning our personal drama into a human interest story that resonated with readers. Within days, the article had been shared thousands of times on social media, with people praising both the food and the epic family revenge story. The publicity was incredible for business, but more importantly, it forced my family to confront their own biases and assumptions. We began having regular family dinners, prepared by professional caterers, ironically, where we slowly rebuilt our relationships on more honest ground. Patricia struggled the most with admitting she had been wrong, but even she came around when she saw the respect I commanded in Chicago's social circles. It's hard to maintain that cooking isn't a real career when your daughter is featured on magazine covers and invited to cater for politicians and celebrities. Jessica asked me to cater her wedding the following spring, a request that felt like a genuine peace offering rather than an obligation. Marcus started referring potential clients to my business, using his financial connections to help me expand into corporate catering. 6 months after the gala, I opened my 4th restaurant, a small, intimate space focused on experimental cuisine. My parents attended the opening night, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine pride in their eyes as they watched me command my kitchen like the professional I had always been. The success that followed the Whitman Gala was beyond anything I had imagined. Morrison Culinary Group became the most sought-after catering company in Chicago. My restaurants earned their first Michelin stars. Food Network offered me a television show, which I politely declined in favor of maintaining creative control over my work. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. I had proven to myself and my family that respect isn't automatically given based on traditional career paths. Sometimes you have to demand it, sometimes you have to earn it, and sometimes you have to serve it on a silver platter with a side of public humiliation. Today, 2 years later, I'm sitting in my newest venture, a culinary school where I teach passionate students the techniques I learned in kitchens around the world. My family visits regularly, and Patricia has become one of my most enthusiastic promoters in her social circles. But here's the twist that no one saw coming. Eleanor Whitman's charity gala raised more money than any previous year, largely due to the buzz generated by our dramatic evening. The children's hospital wing was fully funded, and they asked me to cater the dedication ceremony. As I prepared the menu for that event, I realized that my revenge had accomplished something I never intended. It had helped save children's lives. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't just proving my family wrong. It was using my success to make a real difference in the world while maintaining the relationships that mattered most to me. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most are the ones who need to see your success the most. And sometimes, the best way to prove your worth is to let your work speak louder than their words ever could. The ultimate twist reveals that Hannah's revenge against her family inadvertently created the most successful charity fundraiser in the organization's history, directly funding a children's hospital wing and saving lives. What began as personal vindication transformed into meaningful social impact, showing that the best revenge can sometimes benefit everyone involved.